Welcome to the Guiding Careers in a Digital World with the CGC-DigiTrans podcasts. Here's our second episode, How the CGC Roundabout Supported Mrs. Kazan in Developing Digital Competences, an interview with Professor Dr. Matthias Zick-Varul and Jenny Schulz.
For the most part of the last century, roundabouts have been as British a feature of motor traffic as driving on the left side of the road. But from the 1980s onwards, Europeans realized how they are not only much safer than the classic crossroads, but also provide for a much smoother traffic flow. They were introduced into continental road systems, where they are now a common feature. 3 years ago, in 2022, a European project team began to explore what can be achieved by transferring the concept of a roundabout as a metaphor from road traffic to career guidance and counselling. The idea is to move career counselling from a one-stop talk between job seeker and a counsellor to a more dynamic process over multiple stages involving multiple actors. A process of counselling that can be initiated through various entry points by job seekers or employees as well as by employers. While the career counsellor is, so to speak, circling on the roundabout, various others, such as companies and providers of further vocational training, can join and leave the circuit where and when required. Taking into account that the greatest challenges, as well as one of the greatest opportunities in the current labour market, is digitalization, the project team focused on these when setting out to test their concept as a career guidance and counselling roundabout for digital transformation. This also defines the format. To enable this process and ensure access to information and knowledge in general, the counselling process takes place not only in the career counsellor's office, but heavily relies on online communication and digital resources. You are listening to an episode of the DigiTrans podcast brought to you by the CGC Roundabouts for Digital Transformations project. My name is Matthias Zick-Varul, and I've been one of the authors of the initial grant proposal to the European Union Erasmus Plus program. Then as a research fellow at the University of Applied Labour Studies in Mannheim. However, just before the work on the project took off, I jumped ship and took on another position as a professor of sociology and social work at the IU International University in Stuttgart. About 2.5 years later, I am curious, how did this idea work out? Today, I'm talking to Jenny Schulz. He's not only working on the German end of this European project, but also is coordinating the cooperation between the Italian, Dutch, and Austrian partners. Hello, Jenny. How's the project going?
Hello, Matthias. Thank you very much for inviting me to this podcast episode. The project is progressing very well, and we are quite pleased with how things are developing. We structured our work into 5 main work packages, and we are now in the final phase. At the start of the project, we produced a desk research report that explored the topic of digital competences for the modern workplace. Following that, we developed what we call the roundabout method, a multi-actor career guidance approach aimed at supporting the development of digital competences through further training. This method was finalized towards the end of 2023. Next, we began looking for counselors who were interested in learning the method and trying it out in their own professional settings. In 2024, this led to a number of exciting pilot cases. Shortly after, we turned our attention to developing a curriculum. The idea here is to translate our findings into a university-level module. We are currently piloting this curriculum as well, and in Germany, our module is set to launch in June 2025. Matthias, I heard that you had a look at one of the case studies we produced.
I did indeed have a look at the materials you have developed, and specifically one case study indeed caught my attention. This one is about a 35-year-old Mrs. Kazan, whose name you obviously changed, a single mother of 5 who left school in Iraq with a baccalaureate, but then had to interrupt her further education when leaving Iraq. Now she is seeking support in order to gain a foothold in the German labor market. Mrs. Kazan would like to work as a classroom assistant and approaches an education counselor at an independent institution for further vocational training to ask for courses in Microsoft Office skills. She has read that this is needed for the documentation tasks in her prospective new job. But she also has concerns because she feels very insecure with information technologies in general. The two of them start a counseling process in which they then also involve a potential employer. At the end, Mrs. Kazan has finished a training program addressing her specific digital learning needs with a view to the envisaged position. Now, the standard procedure would have been just a dialogue between job seeker and counselor, determining the training needs with a view to assumed labor market opportunities. Jenny, can you tell me a bit more about the multi-actor aspect of this process? At what point and to what purpose do others enter the roundabout?
Yes, thank you so much. Broadly speaking, I can say that the roundabout model consists of 6 phases: engagement, assessment, planning, action, results, and evaluation. In theory, a multi-stakeholder approach could be applied in all of these phases. In this particular case of Mrs. Kazan, 2 stakeholders were involved in the counseling process. One was her prospective employer, Mrs. Ehrmann, the name is changed as well, who was brought in very early on. The other one was the training provider, with whom Mrs. Kazan later enrolled in a further training course. The more traditional route would have been for Mrs. Kazan to first complete a training course and then begin looking for a suitable job on the labor market. In this pilot case, however, things worked out a bit differently thanks to the roundabout method. Mrs. Kazan's counselor introduced the idea of involving multiple stakeholders right from the first phase, the engagement phase. Since Mrs. Kazan already came to the session with a specific goal in mind, to work as a school assistant with a particular employer, this potential employer, Mrs. Ehrmann, was identified early on as a key stakeholder in the process. During the assessment phase, the employer was actively involved in the counseling. This allowed them to clarify which digital competences were required for the role. In the planning phase, the counselor contacted potential training providers. 2 providers matched both the competence requirements and Mrs. Kazan's personal criteria. These were also brought into the counseling process. For Mrs. Kazan, it was particularly important that the training provider was easy to reach and that the course could be done part-time. Available funding options also played a key role. To address this, the counselor brought in a relevant funding organization. Mrs. Kazan then chose her preferred provider.
So now, compared with the traditional route, what were the benefits of doing it this way around?
By involving additional stakeholders, the counseling process can be significantly accelerated. It also becomes easier to assess information that would otherwise require considerable effort to obtain. For instance, the employer, in this case Mrs. Ehrmann, knows exactly which digital competences are needed for the job. That knowledge was tapped into directly and used in the planning process with Mrs. Kazan. This allows for more tailored training, ensuring that the competences gained through the course are relevant to the job.
Okay, further question. The digital theme in this case study is very clear to see. Mrs. Kazan managed to bridge the digital divide and become computer literate, so to speak. But the idea was also to facilitate the counseling process itself by using digital technology. Can you highlight how this was done in this particular case?
I don't currently have any information on whether the counseling in this particular case was carried out digitally. But however, from other pilot projects in the counseling context, I know that there are a variety of approaches. For example, the counselor might meet with the client in person while bringing in an additional stakeholder in a hybrid format via video call on a screen, for example. Matthias, I have a question for you. You were involved in developing the project idea, so I'd be interested to know what expectations did you have for the method during the application phase?
Yeah, much of the involvement actually is rooted from the fact that having worked as a job placement officer and careers counselor myself, I was hoping when contributing to the roundabout concept that it would make the process both more successful and also easier to handle. Specifically, I was hoping that involving external stakeholders would ensure that the decisions are more informed on the one hand and therefore more sustainable on the other. But of course, involving multiple actors can also be seen as a bit of a hassle. What are your impressions? Were my former colleagues at the employment agency and other organizations comfortable with the approach?
From my opinion, the approach is still quite new, and it does take some time to become familiar with it. We received a number of reasons from counselors who were interested in using the method but weren't able to implement it. These included a lack of time, not having a suitable case, or simply not enough resources, for example. I personally see the method as an investment in the counseling process. Yes, the first cases will almost certainly take more time than the traditional way. However, the close collaboration with a range of stakeholders means that, for me as a counselor, I become much more familiar with the dynamics of my local labor market. And if I don't have the answer to something, I don't longer or do not longer need to spend time researching it myself or send the client away with the task of finding out on their own. In an ideal case, I can clarify the question right there and then together with the client by involving the relevant expert directly.
Thank you, Jenny, for this most interesting update of your work. Really nice talking to you about the project, and I wish you and the rest of the team all the best for the final stages.
Thank you so much, and thank you for inviting me to this podcast episode.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, so am I happy with the way our initial idea was set to practice? Looking at what it did for Mrs. Kazan, I certainly am. I remember how often I found myself clueless when I, together with clients, looking at options for further training, especially digital training, would have needed some input from the provider as to what is involved. How often did I find it really difficult to help clients overcome anxieties regarding new technologies, sometimes even just to encourage them to register for an email address? Seeing the results of the project so far is really encouraging. I'm also impressed with the flexibility and adaptability that allows for the roundabout approach to be applied in a variety of individual situations and different institutional contexts across Europe, in fact. But of course, it is clear that implementing roundabouts as good practice across the board will come with its own training needs. It will require the skills and commitments of professional career counselors. It will also require a degree of flexibility and adaptability of the institutions and organizations they work for. But if successful, so I hope, they may indeed be instrumental to help job seekers and employers to maneuver their way through a labor market that certainly will not become less complex in the future. If you're further interested in the project, you can access all relevant information, educational material, and much more, including the case study with Mrs. Kazan, via the web links in the show notes. There, you will also find the link to the podcast episode produced by the project partners from Padua on a case study from Italy.